I think what I do is to help people think about cities in terms of equity, in terms of things that can be done. I work a lot in transport. Transport is a fascinating subject because it's one problem that tends to get worse as societies get richer instead of better. So it's interesting because if a developing country city like Chennai or Jakarta gets twice the income per capita, they will have, I'm sure, better hospitals, better health, better schools, but traffic will be much worse. So it's almost by definition non-sustainable. The fascinating thing about transport is that it's not contrary to first impressions, it's not solved by engineering. It's a political decisions. The only way to get rid of traffic is to restrict car use. The only way to solve mobility really is, 70 years ago, women could not vote. And people thought this was perfectly normal. It was not fascist people who thought women should not vote. Everybody, your great-grandparents were very wonderful people who thought women should not vote. So sometimes inequality is before our noses. And we do not see it because we are so used to it. In my opinion, to have a bus in traffic is as absurd as to have women not vote. Because clearly, if all citizens are equal, a bus with 60 passengers has a right to 60 times more road space than a car. So we should have exclusive lanes for buses. But not only in terms of democracy, in terms of technical solutions. It doesn't take a PhD from MIT. It doesn't take a mathematician. Any committee of 12-year-old children, after 20 minutes, will realize that the most efficient way to use scarce road space is with exclusive lanes for buses. So if you would take the right political decisions, you would solve mobility in most cities in a couple of months. But then it takes political decisions. And who are the ones who own the cars? The powerful people. Whoever decided that cars, most cities in the world give more space to parked cars than to people, than to pedestrians. Who decided this? Did anybody vote on this? Any child has the same right to road space as an adult with a car. I think to be honest, we have cities that are totally wrong. It cannot be normal that we grow in fear of getting killed, that this is normal. We had cities for 5,000 years before cars. Only for pedestrians, no danger. Any child, any 10-year-old child could walk anywhere, or even 7-year-old child. And all of a sudden, cars appeared. And we continue to do as if nothing had happened. It just made bigger roads. That's it. And everything had happened. It's a totally different world. It's not a minor change. Because we are now living in fear of getting killed. We move in fear of getting killed. We have these horrible machines that go by, make noise, and kill us. And we think this is normal. And we continue to design cities around car streets. So what I dream of is cities that should be with thousands of miles of greenways only, pedestrian streets, but not little quaint downtown pedestrian streets, but bicycle highways without next cars. More than 80% of the cities that we will have in 2050 are yet to be built. 80%. Only in the United States, they have to build 3 times, or the next 35 years, they will have to build 3 times more homes that exist now in Britain. The way people move is defined more by the way how do we design cities. Why not design, for example, let's say you're going to design a city from scratch, from zero. There is just agricultural field. Here is a Chinese or an Indian city. How are you going to do it? The same stupid city with streets for cars all over? Why? This is what we are doing. Why not have half the streets just for pedestrians? Why not have streets just for buses, which would work like a fantastic subway, much cheaper and much nicer? Why do we have to go underground like rats to a subway? Is it pleasant to go like a rat underground? Only so that we leave more space for cars above ground? To me, this is mad. You know? Besides, it's much more expensive. London, where you live, has the longest subway in the world and still moves 1 million more people by bus than by subway. So I think we just have to think very different. I think we are in front of something completely wrong. This is what moves me. What, especially at this time in history, never in history what we are having now will happen what we have now. Never. Where we're going to build 80% of our cities in the next 40 years, 30 years. When we design a city, we're trying to design a way of life. What makes us happy? To see beautiful things. In the case of water, we don't have water in our city. I wish we did. We have some beautiful mountains, which we don't use enough. Sometimes the environmentalists recently have become an obstacle for people to enjoy nature because, they just say, just don't get near it, Environmentalists would have never allowed the existing cities today to exist because they would have never allowed cities to be built near the water. London would not be around the water, or Paris, or Rome, or Venice would never exist if environmentalists had a say. So, but water is very interesting because water makes us happy. It's just beautiful. I mean, contact with nature is fascinating, but water is magic. It's magic. It just makes you happy to look at it. It makes you feel happy, romantic, gives you pleasure, period. But it was not always like this because many cities were built around the water because almost the history of civilization was the history of draining swamps, what now is called wetlands, in a more politically correct word. This is the way, because this is the way agriculture was able to develop. Before that, people lived in mountains which would not flood, but this mountain agriculture could only sustain very small populations. Only river basin agriculture could support large populations to create rich cities such as Prague or London or Paris, and so, or Florence, and so. But even after the swamps were drained, and you can still see, for example, even today, Paris, the center of Paris is called still Les Marais, which is the swamps, or the wetlands, if we use the politically correct word today, So, now, but for hundreds of years, even after the valleys were drained and you were able to build cities, the rivers where sewage would come. So there was dirty, smelly, horrible, and in the port, and so it was always there where the thieves were, and the prostitution, and the smells, so it was ugly. So people, the waterfronts were not like we see today as a treasure, but on the contrary, even very recently, only 100 years ago, I mean, even less, they were smelly and horrible. And so later cars appeared. And so engineers thought the best place to, then we began to make cities for cars all over. And the best place to put roads was next to the rivers. Because that's the only place where you don't have intersections, so you don't have to stop ever for a corner, except when you have a bridge. And if you need more space, you just fill in a little bit more of the riverfront, and it's perfect. And then only very, very recently, we built highways next to the rivers, which we think today is the stupidest thing. We did it even in the 60s in Paris. Mr. Pompidou, the president, built this crazy highway next to the Seine, It was very recently. And of course, in the developing world, we are still doing these stupid highways next to the water. So we are only now realizing what a stupid thing that was. And how can we get rid of cars in front of the water and all of these things. But this is very recent. That's all I'm trying to say. This is very recent that rivers are clean, free of bad smells. And then the problem is river fronts were always bad because of smells and sewage. And when we finally were solving this, then we put highways, so we went from bad to worse, And only now we realize that not only smells were bad, but the highways are almost as bad or worse, So, and now we are learning that how we should do better waterfronts. So, it seems to me that more or less clear what should be done with waterfronts to most people. But it's not so clear what to do with the rest of the city. You know, people are living in these apartments, like they're like boxes, put like this, in the middle of some green, with some cars parked in front, sometimes, and the people go to the mall. 500 years ago, cities had to be built in these valleys, next to the rivers, because you could not transport food. You know, you could only carry food 100 kilometers at most, or before you would eat it all. Now we could actually build cities very far from the agricultural areas and from the water and from everything, but do we want to? I don't know. I think it's beautiful. I mean, the cities that have water are the most beautiful ones, like New York or London or Paris. Imagine if Paris was just in the middle of nowhere without river.